Well, thanks again for coming out tonight. This, it's funny. People laugh when I say this. I actually hate writing. I love doing this part. It's first of all, the weirdest, funniest thing about this whole book thing has been how many different pockets of America this has hit. My favorite review came from the American conservative saying, quote, "Every conservative should read Austin's book," which is, I'll let you guess, I went to Grinnell, you can probably guess my politics. But I'm a big believer that things get done in American history when weird bedfellows get together. Because everyone's seen the system not work for different reasons. It's like that parable where like blind people are touching an elephant, describing different things, but it's the same thing. We're all not seeing it not work for different reasons. Like I was just telling some folks earlier, I was just down at the Texas State Capitol 2 weeks ago during all that shenanigans at the invitation of a state Republican. Because they want to talk about beef. But also, before I get going to, I just want to thank you guys all. Thank you for the organizations that invited me here today. Ames has always had a special place in my heart, growing up in Cedar Rapids, because my best friend went to college here, and my first boyfriend went to college here. So I've done that drive so many times back and forth. I've eaten so much of that barbecue place, so much of the old Taco Bell. I don't think the Taco Bell is by campus anymore. I don't know Visha, whatever happened to Visha. But, and also even this is the nerd in me, the Center for Iowa book, I don't think Iowans appreciate how powerful the literary heritage of this state is. You have one of the best writing programs in the world here. You have so many national bestsellers living in this state. Even like at Cedar Rapids, there's Liz Lynn's, there's all these people doing it. And there's such a beautiful ecosystem. And part of the reason why I say that is, it's so easy to be dark right now. I just feel people crave hope. And that's one of the things I want to lean into is that hope. And so that's why this used to be my last slide, and now I make it my first. Because so much of my book is how do we get to this moment? And then how do we get out of it? But part of getting out of it is where do you want to go? Because you can't just drive a ship and not know where you're trying to go. This is my vision. It's a little cheesy to say, but I think Iowa should be the Tuscany of North America. It's a good line. That's the funny part. I've been doing this thing for a year now. I have my good jokes. And it's funny to see which jokes work in which parts of America. But I also just side note, what I realized with college classes is that Gen Z kids don't know what robber barons are. So I had to explain that concept. But going back to the Tuscany thing is, we have the best soil. I think living on the East Coast made me realize is just how awful that soil is and how bad the tomatoes are in the summer. And so lean into that. Here's the thing, there's already people doing it right here. How do we help them grow? Because right now they're running uphill. So that's my vision right there is, first of all, that vision is so traditional. So my vision is any American can sit down in a local restaurant and enjoy a meal where those that picked it, grew it, processed it, transported it, cooked it, and served it, all made a reasonable living at a fair price. Here's the thing, never forget, what we have now is radical. All the reforms we're talking about are traditional, because what powers that be will say is, anyone trying to change it's crazy. Just always remember that they are the crazy ones. It is radical that one person does 5 million hogs. So, my book is, I used to profile 7. I just had Cisco in the paperback as number 8. And the funny thing about doing this is, people would come up to me and let me know about barons I missed. So I have a whole document called my B-side barons. Oh, there's a carrot baron, there's a potato baron. I'm not kidding, you know those giveaway carrots? The two carrot companies have like an 80% market share in the grocery store. So I have this whole document going, but Cisco's the one I wanted to add. Part of it is just, I've been on the road so much, I've been very grateful to present this book in over 20 states. But all diner food kind of tastes the same, and it's kind of So I was like, what's going on there? So actually, I wrote that chapter last summer at White Rock. The Garst family let me have their old farmhouse for a month. This is not healthy. I like to write. I like to be alone and write in bed. So I just would write all day and then go for runs at night. And then talk to people too in local restaurants. And then I also finished that chapter up in Decorah. The bookstore up there has a lovely apartment up there they let authors use. And so it's been kind of fun to like workshop that new chapter, and we'll get there in a second. But each one of these chapters is I'm profiling a different robber baron, but they're really narrative devices to tell a bigger structural story. I'm kind of hiding the vegetable. So like Cargill's, we'll talk about that one. That's my Farm Bill chapter. You know, I put I shouldn't say trashy. I didn't want to tell the same story over and over. So like my hog barons, I call that my trashy Florida money. Whereas Cargill's this aristocratic Greenwich, Connecticut. You know what I mean? That way it's a different type of story. So the book is laid out where I'm kind of building on concepts. So before we dive into some barons, I want to show you a few slides. This is another one I always lead with, is what I realized in the back of people's minds, I was asking you to pay more for food. Industry justifies its destruction for cheap food. Here's the thing, enjoy this nerd moment. That's not factually true. What you will hear Farm Bureau say is, as percent of incomes, what Americans spend on food is the lowest in the world. That's factually true. That's 6.8%. Here's the thing, that gains in income have only gone to the top bracket in our society. So you shouldn't really use that metric. What you should use is, what does the average person spend at the register? When you cut the data that way, you get this 3,694. That's what matters to the bottom half of Americans. And when you look at it that way, we are way above most of our peers. And anyone that's been to Italy knows when you spend $1 food gets you a very different quality than $1 here. So I love to lead with this is we're paying more for garbage. And here's the thing, that's what industry does. In econ, they call it negative externalities. They push that onto us. But we shouldn't be shocked. I think the food markets are some of the most concentrated spaces in America. Bloomberg Law did this piece, I don't even know what time it is anymore, 3 years ago, right before Thanksgiving, where every protein in America, including tuna and salmon, was under investigation for price fixing. And then 2 weeks later, turkey was under investigation. Because here's the thing, when there's only 3 or 4 players in a market, it's really easy to collude. Because never forget, the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. That's where profits are. Competitive markets are hard, they're ruthless. On top of it, when we talk about this stuff, we use national figures. Food's local. You're not taking your milk from New Mexico and selling it in Maine. A friend of mine, Pete Harding, if anyone reads The Milkweed, did this paper a few years ago where he looked at the New England milk market, and one company had an 85% market share in milk. I don't need a PhD in econ to know that those people are not paying a fair price for milk. And this is just rampant across the food system. J.M. Smucker's has like a 60-70% market share in peanut butter because they all know all those brands. And here's the thing too, they tend to do the store brands, so it tends to be even bigger. So back in the day when you wanted to collude, you get together at a hotel next to the interstate. Those days are gone. Companies now share data. They use third-party brokers so let's take chicken. So all the chicken companies now essentially send their data to one different company. The company aggregates that information and sends it back to them. So they can kind of forecast what everyone else does. So it essentially allows you to collude without being in the same room. So what this chart does is there's a company called AgriStats that does this for the meat companies. These are all the meat companies in the world and the different proteins they do and how they all share their data. You might have heard about this in the news. A lot in big cities, apartment landlords are doing this now. It's a very rampant thing. And then here is the best nerdy version of, you know that phrase, a picture says 1,000 words? This is the graph version. So, especially right now, this blue line is what you pay for beef at the store. The red line is what the cattle rancher gets. If you notice up until 2015, they lockstep. And then all of a sudden, 2015, it diverges. That gap you see, that's monopoly. That's monopoly capture. So first of all, imagine what it means for these rural communities not having that money in them. On top of it, look where it was the worst. Early COVID. And the only reason I'm told it's tightened since then is because of we're in a massive drought right now in the cattle markets. And also, fun little fact, McDonald's is the largest buyer of beef. In most industries, you tend to treat your largest customer the best way possible. Well, guess what? Even McDonald's is mad. It filed lawsuits against the beef packers this fall for price gouging. So you know things are bad, McDonald's is even getting shortchanged. Also, I want to flag this paper from another Iowan, Kate Conlow. So there's this great documentary called Inside Job. It's about how the Great Recession happened. And what we realized were banks were paying off academics to essentially write articles to justify deregulation. And they weren't disclosing it. So in response, economic journals required, hey, if you're going to take money from Bank of America, just say it. Which Kate discovered is in the food industry, there's a lot of agriculture journals who are not enforcing that policy. She highlights an editor of a journal who doesn't even enforce his own policy. So she highlights on his own website, he brags about all the corporate money he takes. He doesn't disclose it, and then he's the one on NPR telling you you're not being price gouged. It really corrupts the public conversation. And this is a really concerning thing, especially as we have privatized our public universities. And also, finally, the system makes bad tasting food. Especially meat and dairy, inputs matter. What you feed a cow impacts the milk. So the New York Times rated Butters last year for Thanksgiving, and they ranked that Kerrygold Butters #1. It's doing blockbuster numbers in the grocery store, you might have seen it. Here's the thing, that's just the way butter used to be in America. Most butter now, if you notice, it's like an ugly white or yellow. It doesn't spread well because it's mostly corn in the diet. That's just the old-fashioned cows on pasture. Yeah, but so keep in mind, so that butter is more expensive because it's not getting the subsidies. That's the thing to keep in mind is everything you eat is subsidized. The question is what degree. We have chosen to subsidize chips and pop and not carrots. We subsidize CAFOs, not animals on land. That's why I actually love looking at Drugtown ads. I do that every week. Because it's ridiculous that, I think I was looking at this week's ad, mums were $14, but like some dairy product was $2. You're like, this just doesn't make sense. But I was like, so this is my hog baron, this is the baron that started everything for me writing this book. Fun little fact, not official yet, but you want to watch the show Mad Men? So I'm working with writers of it to turn this into a TV show. Yeah. Nothing's like, we're like very much, think of it as like, one character is like an Aaron Brockovich type, but then the other part is like Lady Macbeth. Like, I just have the feeling that the wife kind of runs the show. There's something, it's almost like a Breaking Bad. I've never seen Breaking Bad. But there's something what's fascinating about Jeff and Deb Hansen is they were just like every other farm family in the 70s in Iowa. They got their start because they started building the metal sheds for confinements. And something happened that flipped them from an average farmer in Iowa to a baron. So we're kind of thinking of that as like a TV show. So yeah, this thing started in Vox, an article I wrote with my buddy. And honestly, for me, the nerd in me wanted to know, how did a hog couple become the most powerful political people in Iowa? This all started in 2018. They gave the largest donation in that Fred Hubbell and Kim Reynolds governor's race. And also, part of it was to, why do I, when I drive Iowa now, I don't see animals? I smell them, but I don't see them. So here is their farm on the far right. It's over by Jordan Creek. And then here's one of their CAFOs. So first of all, look at the top left. I mean, that looks like the New Jersey Turnpike. That land is so dead, devoid of life. And then also this picture on the bottom right raises the question of, what's a farmer? Are you a farmer if that's what your office looks like? Or the largely undocumented workforce you employ, are they the farmers? So their whole operation is in Iowa, the vast majority of it. They're like in 2/3 of the county. This whole chapter to me is a story of regulatory capture. And so as weird as this sounds, it all goes back to chicken. A century ago, when we wrote regulations in response to the jungle, we didn't write chicken into the regulation. It's because there weren't commercial chicken slaughterhouses. You just took a chicken in your backyard and you butchered it. So what happened down south, where corporations took that really exploited model of the black farmer sharecropping and applied it to chicken. So to this day in America, most chicken farmers do not own their bird. They lease the bird, they are given the feed, they take on a ton of debt to build a metal shed to the company's specifications, they babysit the bird, they give it back to the company, they are paid in what is called the tournament system, where none of us are paid the same price. We have to compete against each other, so whoever adds the most gets paid the most, whoever adds the least gets paid the least. So if you're lippy to me, I give you the runt of the litter, you add the least, you get paid the least, you eventually go bankrupt. It's a very exploitive model. On top of it, it's an old stat, but like 70% of chicken farmers to this day in America live in poverty. So here's the thing. USDA could have stepped in and be like, no chicken, behave like the other meats. Because guess what? When you exploit labor in the environment, you start gaining a lot of market share. So what happened in hogs, they call this chickenize, when other industries become this production model. It started in North Carolina. A state senator wrote the regulations to do this production model in the mostly poor black areas. And here's the thing, and I tell this story in this chapter, is he started gaining a ton of market share. The really dark thing with the stuff in North Carolina is, in Iowa, you see the manure, it's under the buildings, they drain them, inject it into the soil. In North Carolina, you can't do that because of the water table usually, so they have to spray it into the air. So you have all these stories of poor black churches having to repaint their steeples every few years because they turn brown. I mean, this to me is structural racism. But there's this, some business elite in Des Moines freaked out when this started happening because North Carolina started getting a lot of market share. Again, USDA could have said, no, North Carolina, we're not engaging in this race to the bottom. But what happened was the business elite said we're not going to lose our #1 hog status in Iowa because they want to sell as much corn as possible and butcher as many hogs as possible. And so it's lost. This is why I love doing history stuff, is literally in the report they commissioned is let's forego the family farm. Let's stop romanticizing it. And so you saw this rural rebellion. Actually here in Story County, I found this great article, Story City, that just like north of town. There was a meeting where, I think it's 2,500 people live there. 1,000 people were in that gym one night. Because you had a true rural rebellion in Iowa. Because your home, not only are you have all these hog farmers going broke because they can't compete on price against this model, it destroys your home value. These things are manure factories. And you had this rural rebellion in Iowa, this epic fight. That's that map of North Carolina where the hog production is. And you just sit there and see, and here's a classic thing that happens is Wall Street capital floods in. And that's what happened to Iowa, is that these CAFO people got a ton of Wall Street money. You see basically the family farm, here's the thing that happens is the margins get tighter and tighter and they say, it's not worth it. Or I don't want my kids to go into it. But then there's always a glut moment. Hogs cratered in Iowa in '98. That was like the New Deal moment for hogs. What happens is the companies with Wall Street money can last through that moment. All the family farms exit it, and then the industrial farms consolidate. And it becomes a winner-take-all. Hold on, let's see if I have this. The thing to keep in mind is we're producing more hogs in America, but we're not eating more pork. So if you look at that pink line, look how much more export pork we do. We're essentially destroying rural Iowa to feed China and Mexico. And at some point, you have to ask that question, is it worth it? So here's the cost of this destruction, is we all know most waterways in the state are just too polluted to go into. But it didn't happen overnight. I kind of view it as a lobster in a pot. First one summer, one beach is closed, the next summer, 2 beaches are closed, then 3. We're almost kind of numb to how bad the water pollution is. Like I'm honestly shocked people in Des Moines didn't freak out more that they had that water ban this spring. And then, we all know about the cancer crisis now in the state. Trust me, we're not drinking more than Wisconsin. We know what's going on here. And so let me just finish on the hog that is this scary thing is you see this one family. Here's the thing with the hog barons. There's like 10 hog barons, 10 entities control the hog supply. But I wanted to use them to tell this bigger story of the death of the family farm. So Cargill, fun little fact, Cargill started in Iowa. They started up by Decorah. I think it's like Conover or something, the town. I only know that because my family used to we're all Irish potato people mostly. And we come, part of my family comes from there. But Cargill's a weird one. I feel like you might see Cargill, but no one really knows Cargill. Fun fact about Cargill, they're the largest private company in America. They are bigger than the Koch brothers. Like, I'm from Cedar Rapids, as I said. I went to church next to a Cargill plant, played soccer next to a Cargill plant. I was born next to a Cargill plant. It's like, you gotta think of Cargill as like Standard Oil. And here's why. Oh, let me also read this. Reason why I said Standard Oil is Cargill's all about the movement of grains. Cargill doesn't put its name on food in the store, but basically they control the food system from when grains come out the ground until when it's processed into Oreos or whatever. So this is from one of their own brochures. We are the flour in your bread, the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We are the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, the sweetener in your soft drink. We are the oil of your salad dressing, the beef, pork, or chicken you eat for dinner. We're the cotton in your clothing, the backing on your carpet, and the fertilizer in your field. That is power. That's also really good prose. ChatGPT can't write that. To put their size in context, what they do in revenue is equal to all the tax revenue of all the states in green. So as I mentioned, I use their story to tell the story of the Farm Bill. So I view the original Farm Bill, helped partially created by Iowa and Henry Wallace, as like Goldilocks. For the nerds in the room, they call it supply management. It's figuring out how do you produce enough but not too much. Because what we saw is leading up to the Farm Bill, during World War I, the government asked farmers to step up. All these fields in Europe we can't use, we gotta feed Europe. So farmers did that. Then after the war, there's a glut in the markets. And when there's a glut, people are gonna push their land and make the glut worse because they're trying to save their land. So you see really destructive ecological practices happen. So what the Farm Bill does, comes along is, okay, we're gonna give you some subsidies, but you have to take land out of production. You have to do certain conservation things, and you can only get so much. Here's the thing, it's not perfect, but it's trying to figure out that balance. So the Cargill family hated it. They thought FDR was Marxist, because anything that tries to basically limit production they hate, because they want overproduction, because they want to move and process as much grain as possible. Fun fact, turns out stable markets are good for business. During this time, Cargill went from a regional player to a national player. And I focus on what happened to the Farm Bill. I mean, this took me forever to get my head around, but I realized, to me, things really went off the rails in the 1996 Farm Bill. I call it the Wall Street Farm Bill, because the Farm Bill is only built for Wall Street right now. It's built for Pepsi. Because you realize, think of the Farm Bill, they use a lot of fancy words, but what you realize is everything's designed to overproduce corn and grains. The Farm Bill right now picks favorites. You grow carrots, you get nothing. You grow corn, you get so much. And even like the term crop insurance, when most people hear it, they think, hey, it's insurance for hail, rain, whatever. It's not. It's insurance for low prices. Where the American taxpayer, not Cargill, is paying up to 60 to 70% of the premium for crop insurance. There's also no limit on it. So fun fact, Bill Gates owns some of the most farmland in America, so he can get as much crop insurance to grow corn as he wants. So what does this system do? I think the best example of the failure of this system is this stat right here. For every dollar you spend at the store, what does a farmer get? After the New Deal reforms, was more than 50 cents. We're now at record lows of like 11 cents. So first of all, just imagine rural Iowa if it was 30 cents. I'm always hesitant to use this language. I view a lot of rural America at this point as an extraction colony. The land's producing the most it's ever produced, and none of that wealth is staying there. So we should not be shocked that the politics of rage are filling that void. And then also, so much of the obesity crisis in America is rooted in this. It's a structural thing. You need money now to be healthy in this country because we're subsidizing all the unhealthy food. And you just see obesity rates take off as this system locks in. Here's a good book on that. And then the other thing, this is not really in the book, I kind of snuck it in. The fun thing about paperback is you can kind of sneak things in. So I snuck in this chart. If anyone knows Bozo, Prince, and Des Moines, they helped me design graphics for the paperback. But this is, follow me here, is the beauty of a family farm is it's like a retirement portfolio. You have all these different crops going, so if one craters, you still have other things. What this system does now is it pushes people to do one or two things, which makes you so fragile. And Liz Garst, I asked her when I was at White Rock last summer, why are all the silos in Iowa falling down? You know, there used to be so many growing up and now they're all gone. And she was explaining to me, farmers used to grow their own feed for their own animals. Now you grow, either you grow corn, you sell it to Cargill, Cargill sells it back to you as feed, and then you sell your animal to Cargill. First of all, that makes the system very, very fragile. It also makes the system more expensive because of the fragility of it. Diversity breeds resilience. So this is what that chart shows is farms used to have a lot more things going on. And now they essentially just, cattle's like the only one where you have multiple things usually going on. And then this is the fun one to say names. I think so this whole system is designed to produce more corn and soy every year. Econ 101 is if you overproduce, grow something else. That's not what the system does. That's why we get dumb things like ethanol. I said that at Iowa State last fall and I was so proud. You know what? I felt like that was such edgy language, but like I'm like gonna double down on this one. We can have ethanol or we can have clean water in Iowa. You cannot have both. I just like, I look at corn now and I get, oh, gotta watch. Anyone that thinks it's good for the climate in 2025 thinks the world is flat. Like that conversation's settled. It's not. So you're making it worse. You're also making like the cheapest way to lower grocery prices in this country is to kill the ethanol mandate. Because you're taking the best line, you're not growing food, you're wasting it in your car. And what's fun about this language is, Farm Bureau will tell you this is bad politics, whatever. Ted Cruz won the caucuses in Iowa 16 opposing this. Cow ranchers hate ethanol mandate because it makes their feed more expensive. It makes renting land more expensive. That's the thing too, is it's actually really destructive for the family farm, ethanol is, because it industrializes the food system more. A lot of people still doing pasture can't compete for rental income. And also, most corn will be robotic soon. So the question is, what do you want the future of Iowa? Do you want to be a bunch of robots doing ethanol and confinements, or do you want a Tuscany? I've never framed it that way before. But going back to Cargill, after my little ethanol diatribe, the thing with Cargill that's so scary is there's such a black box we don't know. And there's this example where Colombia had a massive civil war, 250,000 people were killed. And one of the things they did to heal their society was you can only own so much farmland. Oxfam discovered not only did Cargill exceed it, it exceeded it by 36 times. These things, they're just so powerful. And so as you read my book, you'll notice, okay, you know at Dairy Queen when you get a blizzard, they put a little curlicue? The last line of every chapter I think of is like a curlicue. And so this chapter, the last line is, it's better to think of Cargill as a modern day version of the 19th century British Empire. Because the sun never sets on their empire. They grow grain around the world. So then, I'm not gonna talk about this baron, but I wanna show you this slide. This is my coffee baron. Because part of this chapter are two things. Number one, fun fact, first anti-monopoly laws in the world came out of Iowa. It was farmers mad about grain elevators and railroads. So even when we tell history, we think of FDR broke up the meat trust. That was decades of activism. It started locally. These things always start locally. And the second thing is, it's lost history, but a big thing the US military did after World War II was trust busting in Japan and Germany. Monopolist, finance, fascist. So this secret German family owns all these brands. Your little Keurig cup, your little Krispy Kreme, your Panera. all that kind. It's that illusion of choice. Also, when they bought Blue Keurig cups, they got all these brands too. Your Dr. Peppers, your A&Ws. That's what this family does, is rich families used to buy stocks. This family does monopoly plays. In finance, they call it a roll-up. Their new play is actually vet clinics. They're buying over 1,500 vet clinics. Because this sounds awful, they realize people are economically irrational with their pets. But, oh man, here's some hope. I think one of the best political appointees President Biden did was appoint a young woman named Lina Khan to be the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission. She put a stop to that. She shut that down. This young woman is wanting to bring us back to this anti-monopoly enforcement. She's very much Louis Brandeis, that old Supreme Court judge. But her whole thing is we want to avoid concentrations of power. And any day now, a judge is going to announce how he's going to break up Google. And that's because of her. And the politics of this stuff are weird. Steve Bannon praised her. Matt Gaetz praised her. It's because there's a weird machismo to this stuff. And here's the thing, the politics on this stuff are really good. That's why when I read my meat chapter is, I think going after the meat industry is one of the most bipartisan things now in America. Because everyone's, beef is at record high prices and a lot of cow ranchers are not receiving it. So Sysco. So this is that new Baron I told you about. Just this, my distribution Baron. You might have seen these. You might have seen these trucks outside of restaurants. So they had one warehouse in Ankeny. So this is. Here's the thing about Sysco. I kind of call it, this is like my Frankenstein chapter. I love the person. I really admire the person that created Sysco. He's the best of American business. He worked at A&P. His brother and dad died young, so he dropped out of college to help his mom start at A&P. And he's one of those classic things where they saw things before everyone else. He saw the rise of frozen food and what that would do. He started doing frozen fruit, and he didn't think A&P was moving aggressively enough into frozen food. Second is he saw what women, Rosie the Riveter, that kind of women entering the workplace would do to eating out. I say this because I don't think we really, until I wrote this chapter, I didn't realize it is the amount. First of all, we eat out like once a day usually at this point. Eating out is such a new thing for our culture. Before World War II, only the rich did it when they traveled, and usually when average people did it, you brought a dish. It's like a church function. But he saw with women entering the workplace, they're not going to have time to cook a meal. They want to do it takeout, eating out. So that's where the whole idea for Sysco came from. Is think of Sysco, an industry they call it a broadliner. Think of it as a grocery store for restaurants. Also, this is the first time I'm presenting this chapter, so we're going to do this together. So his idea for it came from this crazy Irish oil man built this hotel in Houston. By the way, it had 15 kinds of green paint in it. But he realized he was at the loading dock for the food, and he saw that the person doing the food for the hotel had 20 different vendors. And what he realized is, in the day, a frozen strawberry is a frozen strawberry. I can't really compete on that. What I can do is, how do I sell him as much supplies as possible? How do I become his everything store? So the original Sysco came from him combining 9 companies to essentially do that. So the thing about Sysco too, it's such a new giant. It's just right after it was formed, it was the first one to go nationwide, only had a 30% market share. And then recently, what was this, 2003, had a 13% market share. Now, according to its own website, is 50%. Fun little fact for the researching, what's so funny is, if you go to the investor relations tab of the website, corporations always tell you stuff like this. Because what they're basically telling you is, we have a monopoly, you're gonna get profits. But, so Sysco, to my calculations, it didn't get big because it was organic growth. It got it through acquisitions. It bought over 216 companies, including the one in Ankeny. And to my knowledge, the US government only stopped one. And part of this is the way monopolies laws are written in America, the government only looks at the big mergers. But what Sysco does is it goes in it buys a seafood supplier in Miami, it buys a fresh fruit supplier in LA, the little ones. Because its whole thing is to add to its catalog. And so even when since this US Foods merger by the Obama administration rejected in 2015, they bought, to my calculations, over 31 companies. It's just kind of like, it's almost like a block, you know what I mean? It just keeps absorbing things. And part of this chapter I want to get, and also it does a lot of the chain restaurants you go to. So if you go to their website, it just brags about the different chains like Olive Garden, Quiznos, that it does. Yeah. And you're also seeing in hotel, they do a lot of hotels and hospitals. Actually, I've done it, okay, you might have noticed I talk fast. I am sorry. When I get excited, I do it. So what I've been doing is I've been doing a lot more nursing homes. So I slow down. It has blown my mind how bad the quality of nursing home food is. And also hospital food. The areas that are some of the most important places for good food, we're serving the worst. And it's usually Sysco. But also what you're seeing, again, I'll try to slow down. You're also seeing consolidation in that space where the creation of one big boy makes other big boys, because everyone wants to have negotiating power. So even the chain restaurants are consolidating. This one company, named after the main character in Ayn Rand's Fountainhead, owns all these brands. Jersey Mike's and Jimmy John's are the same company. They don't fully own Culver's because everyone freaks out about Culver's, but they have a large share of Culver's. And the other thing too to keep in mind, part of what this chapter is getting at is, here's the thing, like, for example, a lot of what Sysco does is, a lot of the food in these places are tasting the same anymore because it comes from the same places. And I call it like you're cutting corners. For example, a lot of the frozen, the jalapeno poppers you get at a restaurant, they're made in Mexico, assembled there. And, you know, I don't want, there's something, you lose quality when someone's not stuffing it right before you eat it. And here's the thing, things can go too far. And part of this chapter is Sysco started as an aid to family restaurants, and now I think it's killing them. Because it's really undermining them, because the thing to keep on with Sysco is it doesn't want to deal with local food. It wants to deal with someone that can provide for all these warehouses. And so, as I said, I'm from Cedar Rapids, cold watches are a big thing. Here's the thing about local restaurants. Local restaurants maintain culture. Sysco doesn't sell a cold watch. No grocery, you know what I mean? Like, so we do cold watches at our wedding, because I'm part like quasi-bohemian. I say quasi because you grow up, you're told you're like a big something, and you do family history, and you're like, I'm only like 10%. Yeah. So, but we did, so my mom's also, because she's Irish Catholic, she has 12 siblings, and we did 500 kolache orders for our wedding, because we also want people to take home kolaches. We worked with a local restaurant was able to do that order, and they were good. I mean, I say this because, for the nerds out there too, Texas has kolaches too, but they're very different. They put meat in them. But I say all this because it's just, that's why to me is everything with Sysco, the dominance of Sysco is it stifles innovation and it homogenizes everything, where everything's kind of meh. You know what I mean? You're losing that regional identity stuff. Like, part of Iowa heritage is a tenderloin, a Maidrite. You know what I mean? We can go through the list. And you lose something when you lose that. Because no one opens a restaurant to become rich. You do it because you love it. And part of this chapter is I wanted to focus on the hope is if anyone's been in Harlan, Iowa, there's this great restaurant called Milk and Honey. I write about Milk and Honey. So Ellen was just named Mother of the Year, her and her husband farm. She also, at her restaurant, she serves her own food. But first of all, we were filming something there earlier today, and you know all these Brooklyn people there, they couldn't believe that her meal, her breakfast, is cheaper than McDonald's meal. You're having like a local Iowa skillet, her chorizo, and it tastes so much better, and it's cheaper. First of all, that's what the way this system used to be. It is radical that it is this. Here's the thing, Ellen created her own Sysco. It's because Sysco didn't want to deal with local farmers in Western Iowa to get into Omaha and Des Moines. So she created a company, nonprofit, helped launch it. So it was buying food from local farmers, giving to local schools. Sadly, it took a big hit with the Doge cuts. which says a lot that the world's richest man is cutting this thing to give local food to local Iowa children. But I want to focus on that is, this is what Iowa could be. We could have more of this. You look at that, first of all, just look how much personality is in that. They do fun little weird things, like they're always innovative, and also the workers are just happy. You go in that space, there's a sense of pride, the chef has cooked something weird today that I want you to try. It's like leaning into that. But Ella will tell you, knowing what she knows now, she probably wouldn't do that Cisco thing again, because they lost a lot of money as a family, it was really, really hard. People like her are pushing up a boulder up the hill. Our goal is, how do we make it a level playing field so they have a chance to compete? And this chapter is really sad too, because this old man creates this company, goes into retirement in the late 80s. He donates to charity, donates to hospitals. He still keeps an office in the company. And he noticed, and what he did is, all these little dots you see, the green ones, are warehouses. It's kind of like Hy-Vee. Hy-Vee famously lets the store managers do their own thing. He let the warehouses do their own thing. You know your community, you buy from whatever. He retires. A few CEOs later, a new CEO comes along and hires a consultant. Now this old man, John, hated consultants. He's like, they don't know my business, and also they'll tell my competitors everything I do anyway, so why let them share my trade secrets? But this consultant comes in and says, you need to centralize procurement. Standardized. And here's the thing, John noticed it in the numbers. So he wanted to go to the board, he wanted to bring this issue to the board. The current CEO, this is what former executives told me, didn't want him to do that. So you don't tell someone who founded a company his life's work, you can't do that. Of course he's going to get to the board. He did something a little secretive, he worked with his administrative assistant to get them the memo. He was escorted out the next day. He died a few months later, and kind of like the Carters, his wife also died a few months later too. And I say this because, and you just see like Cisco has become such almost like that Frankenstein monster since then, is, I kind of think of regulations like guardrails. Guardrails exist to protect companies from themselves, to some point. Because now when you lose guardrails, you allow race to the bottom. And it's hard for people to compete on price against this type of production model. So what do we do? I think, where do we go from here? I think this is the single most best thing we can do for this country, for rural America, is put animals on the land. Cows deserve to be on pasture. It is, and here's the thing, regardless of what Stern corn scientists say ethanol is going to die, cars are moving the batteries. They're trying to put ethanol in the airplanes, but that's just the reality is they're moving the batteries. What are we going to do? Right now, it's like watching Wile E. Coyote run off a cliff. My plan is, as ethanol dies out, we put animals back on the land. We restore the middle-class family farm. Because there's going to be advances in robotics, but one person can only look after so many cows on land. And the other thing too is look at bright line rules. How do you essentially put up barriers to stop monopolization? So fun fact, Iowa, we have a law in the books called the Packer Ban. It says a corporation cannot own the animal it slaughters. We don't enforce it. Smithfield, owned by the WH Group of China, cuts a check to Iowa State every few years not to enforce this law. So like Brenda Bird talked a big game about being anti-China. She could choose to enforce that law. Tom Harkin, he was senator, tried to do that federally. And that's a great way to essentially do that. Another thing, Teddy Roosevelt had a rule that's no longer enforced, that it banned packers from going into retail once you're so big. I didn't talk about this, but Walmart's actually getting into the beef business and also the milk. So you could do a rule like that to stop Walmart going into that space. The other thing you could do is, once a company gets so big, you can ban mergers. You can essentially say, Cisco, you can no longer buy little companies. You're just too big. 3, and this is where another thing of hope, is focus on institutional buyers. This is what I was talking about down in Texas, is they're thinking of a rule where all state universities have to buy 10% of your food from Texas farmers. Buy locally, build up these ecosystems. As we phase out this old one, how do we help create this new one? And you've seen a lot of schools in Iowa are doing it already, but they're running uphill. Storm Lake does a lot of this, where they buy local food. But think of it, there's no reason why, like Kirkwood and DMAC have really good culinary programs. People should be able to go there, get that degree, go home, make a decent living, full-time job, cooking local food. It's also really good politics. Because like no one wants to feed a kid a Lunchable. The fourth one is, we need to change the Farm Bill from picking favorites to subsidizing farm practices. We should subsidize buffer strips, cover crops, let farmers decide what's best for the land, but we need to stop picking favorites. Because right now, the thing to always keep in mind is, this system is all about maximizing corn. And if you're not maximizing corn, you're putting yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. Fifth, this one's a harder one to talk about, but is the domestic ownership of the food system, is having American companies own the food system. And for me, this goes back to, we used to have rules in America where if you owned a TV station or radio station, you had to be American. That kind of collapsed because of a guy named Herbert Murdoch. But going back to that is just, there's national security issues with owning your own food supply. And the scary thing, especially in meat, is a lot of the meat companies now aren't even American, and they're also state-backed monopolies. They call it national champions, an econ term, where like, for example, pork is so important to the Chinese diet. That's why there's a lot of state-backed capital given to the WH Group. 6 is to rethink USDA. I used to say strip USDA for parts, but given recent events in DC, that didn't feel appropriate. But it's just figuring out what it should be. It feels like there's a lot of mission drift. For example, I mentioned that woman, Lena Khan, earlier. She has antitrust authority in almost every market except meatpacking. USDA has a carve out. And as you read my meat chapter, you'll probably guess I have a certain anger at a former governor of Iowa. Because Tom Vilsack, the fact is the meat markets got more concentrated under President Biden. They didn't do anything. And 7 is journalists. Journalists are your best friends. Lean into the David versus Goliath of it all. Here's a cool story on this piece right here. So Nina is another Iowan, and I feel like I got a lot about Liz. Liz Garson and I were having dinner one night. She was telling me, we have a great program in Iowa where we, deer hunters can donate the carcasses to local meat lockers. The state pays for it to be processed. It's given to food pantries. Here's the thing. No one's testing for lead in the bullets. Liz told me, so I told this journalist. This journalist spent 6 months to write this article mapping out. Right now, only the state of Minnesota test. Now we know. Say something, if you see something, say something. Because most journalists, they're barely making anything, and they're moving a mile a minute. And so that is the best thing you have, is even if you see an article, you're like, oh, they asked the wrong person, send a nice email to the journalist, hey, you should talk to this person, or you should look here, or I saw this sketchy thing. I mean, that for me that's where I get some of the best nuggets in this book. It's just people telling me, well, here's something you didn't know.
What is the yellow? In the legend, the yellow at Minnesota is, what is that?
Yeah, it X-rays for lead in the bullets. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do this. I'll just keep going like this. Public, especially with the governor's race in Iowa, never forget when you elect a governor or president, you're electing tons of appointees. Who do you want in these positions of power? Also, this is where I have fun. What should these systems look like? What should a good meat system look like? I mean, it's easy to complain. At some point, you have to be like, this is what we were trying to get to. This is the structures we want. Thinking about that to me is also the fun part. A student, for example, wrote this paper for a conference I did in New Haven. There's like one grocery store and it's awful. She's like, why is it awful? And so she went down this quest. It turns out landlords have all these agreements or anti-competitive where basically they lock out other grocery stores. So now she's working with the Connecticut AG to essentially ban that practice. Also, thanks for joining an organization. I mean, I think that part of being here tonight, these things are so important, is these conversations wouldn't happen without organizations like this putting that together. And like my book actually opens with Julie Dunn. And like fun little fact from the hardcover to the paperback, I made one big mistake on the first page. I identified Julie Dunn as being from El Dorado, Iowa. She's from Eldora. There is an El Dorado. There is. Yeah, I know. Trust me. That was it. It is. So that's why. So my book opens with Julie Dunn. She's part of Iowa CCI, and she fights back against the hog barons. And what Julie always told me is, we didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get to the promised land overnight, but you have to start doing something. And you also can't do this stuff alone. I mean, I think especially with online, is being in rooms like this it gives you hope, and also that's how you get things done. She's part of the community that fights these CAFOs. And what's so funny is it's mostly pissed off old ladies. They're the ones that go to even my book, a few of them, they ask me to take their names out. They're like, oh, this is what I do for fun. We don't want people to know, but it's like, keep in mind, this stuff always starts locally. And so, the book always makes a great gift, by the way. And just to go back to this, I gotta do the book plug. But I was telling someone earlier, what's been really fun is I was told by the book industry books like this wouldn't sell. So it goes back to the consolidation thing of like, if you live in New York, you go to the farmer's market, you don't know what this destruction is. And I think part of it too is politically, my family is mostly a certain party that's not mine. And so I've been used to navigating these different lines. And what I love about this is it validates a lot of anger and redirects it. So what's been fun is I think being a first gen is I get out proving people wrong. And just showing people that like, hey, this actually is hitting with people. It really matters. And that's why How to Dog Your Books here, and Amazon doesn't do book events. Your local bookstore does. And they help. I'm a new first-time author, you know what I mean? I don't have an MFA, so it really helps people like me get the word out. And so on that note, let me always just finish with this slide and take questions. It's just focus on the hope. What do you want Iowa to be? What do you want this system to be? And focus on, here's the thing, we all know DC is gonna be wild for the next 3 years. Focus on proof of concepts. Where can you have local victories and how can you build on it? What's this local school doing it right? How do we make it easier? So when the stars align, you can sit there and say, let's take that idea and scale it. Because never forget, the New Deal didn't just happen. The New Deal came from Wisconsin and New York State. They were started locally, and so then those programs are scaled. So on that note, and also never forget the power being an Iowan. Like, you guys know Cedar Rapids is a city. The amount of people on the coast that think I grew up on a farm. But in the mind of most Americans is Iowa is to agriculture what Hollywood is to movies. And that's the power we have. Is like, when Americans look for agriculture policy, they look here. So really lean in, that's the power you have, and lean into that. So on that note, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to sign books. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight.